Elica is an attorney who's also an outspoken activist, an outspoken anti-Iranian regime activist. She's British-born, but she's of Iranian descent. And she was just on the Konstantin Kisin podcast, the Trigonometry podcast, I think it's called. And they were talking about regime change. And it's a topic we haven't touched on in some recent videos. And Konstantin said some things that I'd like to respond to. She also said some things I'd like to respond to. So let's just get right to this clip. We'll watch it. And then I have some things to say about where we are in terms of the Iranian people and the big question of regime change. So let's hit it.
I think everybody understands and anticipates that they very well might not come home. But what else do you do? And then the only other option is outside help. And now outside help is like the worst thing that you could possibly do, because this is American imperialism and Israel's plan for greater Israel or greater Iran or whatever the hell it is. So it's like we're fighting a battle on so many fronts, and it's impossible.
Well, it's kind of what I'm saying. I'm not sure that this can get solved the way that people want, and therefore encouraging more people to rise up against the regime. To take a point, look, if I was living in an authoritarian country and I felt the regime was evil, I'd rise up against it. And look, it'd be up to me. Do I get killed or not? Whatever. But from outside, I'm worried that the administration and others have called for people to rise up only for them to be killed for nothing.
But I think that they're killed for nothing if everything isn't locked in place, right? I think if you have the war, which is, decapitating the regime, if you have protesters who are coordinated in rising up, if they are armed, if there are defections, because that point of defection almost always happens where it seems that the instability is at a tipping point, that it could go one way or the other. And then there's personal stakes. There's personal stakes where it's like, okay, this is going this way, so I'm going to, how it's always been with regime change, right? And we even saw with Syria, like it was 11 days. Everybody said, oh, this brutal regime, decades long, the Assad regime, there's no way that this is coming down. But somehow it did. I think the mistake...
after a brutal civil war that lasted God knows how long and killed hundreds of thousands of people. Right, but do we want that for Iran?
No, but when it came down, it was in 11 days.
But you had to have the civil war first.
Yeah. I mean, we've basically had the worst of it, as far as I'm concerned. I think what doesn't make sense is to half-ass these things. That's what I think doesn't make sense. I don't think it makes sense to have a war and to not be sort of collaborating with people like Reza Pahlavi, or, collaborating in ways that can help make the protests successful. Maybe if it involves arming, I don't know, something that involves defection. I just think that this needs to be covered in much more broad way for it to work.
And also, look, nobody's ever really been honest about what it takes to turn a country that is authoritarian to a country which is a liberal Western-style democracy. For example, take Venezuela. My family have been involved in protests time and time again, going out on the streets, demonstrating. But what we have in Venezuela is something called the colectivos, and they're essentially Chavez's or the regime's armed thugs, and they suppress. In order for you to gain freedom, you need to get rid of all the colectivos. In the Iranian case, it's the IRGC. Yeah.
And I think what this really speaks to is how much ideology can really destroy nations, right? So you talk about socialist dictatorships, Islamist dictatorships. In either case, these are people who are convinced to the death of them that their ideology is the right ideology, even in the face of contradictory evidence, right? With socialism, I mean, it's the worst ideology in human history, basically the deadliest ideology in human history. And you see that these people are so totalized in their worldview that they are willing to live and die to maintain that system. It's the same with Islamism, right?
I think to push back on what you're saying, Elica, I think Islamism is actually far worse. So I take what happened in Venezuela with Delcy Rodriguez. Now, people talk about regime change, but Delcy was an integral part of Maduro's government. But, you talk about socialism and all the rest of it. She's not that ideological because she was happy to kick him to the curb and become leader herself, because what she's really interested in is power and status and the money. Whereas you look at, some of the lads in charge of Iran, Yeah, they're pretty.
They really believe.
Yeah, no, they're true believers.
They are true believers.
Yeah.
Right.
They are true believers. And that's why, and it really to me speaks to how much, and I guess this is why I have such a hard time now in the world that we're in, where radicalization is happening, because it's like, I know the story of the other end of that so well, right? Once that radicalization is entrenched, you can't push back on them. There's nothing you can do, because in their minds, they have this story, right? This is my fight. This is my fight, and God wants me to fight this and to defeat the bad people, to bring the good things to the world. And it's like, you see what you're bringing to the world. You see this is just death and destruction. Oh, but they're martyrs. They're martyrs for a greater cause. There's always some way to spin it in your mind. And so it's just, that's really what we're looking at. We're looking at an ideology that refuses to leave Iran. And it's like, how do you kill an ideology?
Well, if you look at history, the only way of doing it, if you look at Japan or Germany, is to essentially decimate the country, bring it to its knees, and then have a process of de-radicalization like we did with Germany.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm worried about this conflict, Elica, because we're not going to do that, right? And no one's advocating for that. And that means, some of the conversations we've had while we've been here, it's likely that you end up in the trap where you're not prepared to do the actual thing that you need to do, because it's terrible. Like what we did to Germany and Japan was awful. You don't want to do that to Iran.
Right.
But that means you don't have a way of achieving your objectives.
Yeah.
You don't have a way of getting rid of the nuclear material. They've taken it, they've dispersed it. We don't know where it is. You're not going to get it with airstrikes. And now also the other thing is they've got control over a hell of a lot of oil, gas, fertilizer, helium, etc. And there are a lot of people are now saying, actually, they've got all the trump cards.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like they've had all the cards for the past 47 years. I just wonder where this goes. Do you know what I mean? Like at some point, this regime has to fall. But when is it going to fall? Well, it can't last forever.
Why?
Nothing lasts forever.
Okay, sure.
Even the British Empire didn't last forever.
Oh, I'm very sad now.
and that pretty much owned the whole world. But
you see what I'm saying, though? Like, it could last another 50 years.
Iran, you have this like really old kind of a nation state that is unified behind language, behind a flag, behind culture, behind all of these things. We don't want a foreign imposed government. That's not what, this is not Iraq. We want.
Well, you do, though. You do want a foreign imposed government.
No, we don't want a foreign imposed government.
Well, if you cause regime change and then replace it with one of your puppets, which is what you want to happen.
No, that's not what we want to happen.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood.
Reza Pahlavi is only a transitional leader. So this has been articulated so many times. I don't know why people don't get this. He's a transitional leader that comes into the country once the regime falls to facilitate moving the country into a democracy where people can vote for their own leader.
What if they vote for an Islamist regime?
Well, no one's going to vote for an Islamist
How do you
regime
know?
because we know the statistics of what people favor.
Oh, okay. I actually don't. What are the statistics?
90% of people in Iran are against it.
Against the regime?
Against the regime.
Wait, how do we know that?
Because there's studies like the Gammon study, which is in, I think, the Netherlands conducted, and it speaks to people inside Iran, obviously anonymously, and they collect data about their public sentiments. And they say that 90%, or is it 85% or 90%, there's 10% that support the regime. Still, it's a country of 90 million, it's still a lot. And
and they have the guns. But your point about 90% is very powerful. I mean, we've had people on the show, Ayman Dean, who's a former Al-Qaeda MI6 double agent, for example. He gave a very different assessment of it, which was like 25% people support the regime, 25% hate the regime. To me, I'll give you a similar example for Russia, which is easy for me to explain. So I am someone who's a fierce critic of the Russian regime in the way that you are a fierce critic of the Iranian regime. But I would not say that I know what percentage of people in Russia
because maybe
oppose.
you don't know.
Because nobody does.
Yeah, but you absolutely can have a fair assessment about the sentiments of a country through extensive polling over time. And for the past 46 decades, repeatedly polls have shown that it's a very high percentage, almost 90% of Iranians who are against this regime. And I just think it's just like who would like this regime? You do have this minority. Of course, you have a minority of extremists, but this is where it's like you do not know Iranians if you think that that's who the majority of Iranians are. They don't identify that way. They don't identify with Islamic extremism. It's not part of our culture. It's not part of our cultural personality. It's so obvious to us that when people ask these questions, it's like, we even give you the statistics, right? We even give you the polls, but it's like people just believe what they want to believe. I don't know what to tell you. It's not a country that's 50% Islamist radicalist. It's not who the Iranian people are.
Oh, sure. No, I'm certainly not saying that. But I again, example from my own experience, which sort of makes it easier for me to think about these things. The Soviet Union was deeply unpopular by the time it collapsed. But that doesn't mean that 90% of people living in the Soviet Union were opposed to the Soviet Union.
I think
if you took a poll in the Soviet Union around the time that it actually collapsed and there was regime change, there was still a ton of people who supported it. It just became weakened economically and morally and in other ways. But to me, when someone says 90% of people in a country agree on something, that to me, you may be right. I'm not disputing it. I'm just saying, to me, that's a bit of an alarm bell because that seems
it's not an alarm bell.
Unprecedented.
All right. Let's talk about this video here. There's a lot in this, and I just want to go through quickly. So first of all, there's that issue of, the protesters went out, they got killed, they're going to get killed again. Can they really stand up to the besieged in the IRGC? So there's something here that Constantine is missing. I pointed this out on a different video that I did about his comments on Iran, and he's talking as though nothing has changed during the course of this war. And let's remember that the besieged and the IRGC have been greatly, greatly degraded. There are Israeli drones and aircraft and potentially also helicopters. We don't even know what's there. And this gets to another point, which I'll get to in a moment, about what we know about this war. The Israelis have indicated, they basically said, Netanyahu said this, our defense minister said this, I think our foreign minister said this, that when the time comes for the protesters to come back out into the street, the Israelis will be providing air cover for them. There will not be any ability to massacre them. Oh, why haven't they come out into the street yet? They haven't come out into the street yet because there's no reason for them to come out into the street yet. There's no good reason for them to. Well, what do you mean? Well, what I mean is that the Israelis and the Americans are more focused on Hormuz, on the shipping lanes, but the Israelis predominantly have been attacking them and attacking them and attacking them. Every single day, the regime gets weaker and weaker. There's no reason for the Iranian people to come out into the street before they're at their weakest possible point. The worst outcome of this war, the worst outcome for the Iranian people, I've said this many times, you might have heard me say it, the worst outcome is if the Iranian people came out too early while what remains of the regime can still murder them and suppress them. So there's no reason for them to come out yet, but when they do come out, when the time comes, they will have air cover. They will be protected. Okay, that is something that you can expect will happen. And as for the issue of defectors, there have been defectors. We know about this. Has it been widespread? We don't know. And this gets into a big issue about this war, and it relates directly, maybe most importantly, to the whole issue of regime change on the ground. And that is that because there's no real ground operation going on, this is a war that's been entirely fought from the air and at sea. And put that fact together with the lockdown, the blackout on internet that the regime imposed immediately when the war broke out. And they've been very strict about it. There are a few people who have Starlink. People within the regime have the ability to have some internet, and that's why you're getting a skewed picture. You're getting a lot of propaganda coming. But the fact that there's no ground invasion also means that we don't have journalists embedded with U.S. or Israeli forces, because there are no U.S. and Israeli forces going in. So this is a very strange war in the sense that we actually don't have any good picture of what's going on the ground. So we don't know what the story is with the Iranian people here, okay? And anyone who claims they do, whatever, maybe they have some little snippets that they're building up. We don't know what's going on the ground. We know what went on the ground before the war, and we saw the massive widespread protests. We saw tens of thousands of people being murdered by the regime, many, many more injured, and millions of people in the streets. We understand what that means, okay? So, to say that, it seems like, oh, there's nothing happening with regime change, we don't know, okay? Now, they got into this issue of you have to de-radicalize the population, and then Elica, that's her name, pushed back and said, no, you don't, because the Iranian people are really opposed to the regime. They started talking about statistics, and Constantine was being very skeptical. You're telling me 90% of the people don't support the regime. Who knows where that number really is? It is really about 10% of the population that is regime affiliated. If you take the Basij and the IRGC and their families and all the people supported by the regime, that really is about 10% of the population. There could be more supporters. Before the war broke out, before the protests that led to this war broke out, we know that a lot of the shopkeepers were more religious and had a little bit more allegiance to the regime. We don't actually know. But what are good indicators? So there's an indicator, which I believe is an excellent indicator of support for the regime. Let me just bring it up here. Well, first of all, before we do that, this is a good time to remind you to go to Israel365charity.com and support the work that we're doing there. There's a lot of people in Israel who are, especially families, young families, who are struggling with everything that's gone on with the holidays and with the airstrikes. There are people who've lost property, who they have death and injury in the family, people who can't work, and many, many more problems, emotional issues. And the social services and the charities on the ground are very much stretched thin. Israel 365 is plugged in with a lot of the best people on the ground. And so please go to Israel365charity.com, click Israel Under Fire, or scroll down to the current projects where you'll find Israel at War, and you could help us support all the needs that are going on the Israeli home front. But the stat I want to show you is this. This is a story from 2023, just a few years ago. And here's what it is. Mohammed Abul Qasim Dulabi, a senior cleric for the Iranian regime, for the Iranian president, delivered a speech to a group of religious students, like in a seminary in Iran. And he stated that 50,000 of Iran's 70,000 mosques have closed. They've closed. People are deserting. It even says here, he indicated that Muslims were deserting the mosques. You follow that? 50,000 of 75,000 mosques. That doesn't mean the other ones are packed or that their attendance hasn't dropped. Understand what this means, though. This is massively significant. He revealed it. Again, I don't think he meant it to get out to Western media. He was talking to a group of students. But he was pointing out that there's a crisis of Islam in Tehran. And this is in 2023, before this last round of protests and all the other destruction and economic collapse that the regime brought on Iran in the last few years. It's gotten way, way worse. That's why there were these mass protests. 2/3 of the mosques in Iran closed. That is an indication. That's even better than polling. Because polling is a sample size and you extract it out. This isn't a sample size. This is a pure number about mosques. So Elica's not far off. The Iranian people are not going to need to be de-radicalized. And also, if you watch the Middle East closely, and I don't believe that Constantine does, I've said this before. I mean, he's a great guy. I respect him. He's very smart. He's brilliant. But when it comes to these issues of Islam in the Middle East, he needs to read more. He needs to understand more the realities that are happening. If you watch Iran closely, and I've been watching it as closely as I can from a distance for years, you know that the Iranian people are not with the regime. Yes, there are some who are, as she says. Of course, there's a minority that are, but you're not going to need to de-radicalize the Iranian population afterwards. It's also worth noting in terms of where Trump is leaning on this thing, there's this fear that Trump is going to leave. Look at this statement from Trump. This just came out yesterday. Talking about the negotiations. Look what it says here. U.S. President Donald Trump told Channel 12 that he was not going to leave in the middle of the war, and also said that his administration is in deep negotiations with Iran to reach a ceasefire. He said that his top Middle East envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, are the point men for ongoing contacts with Iran. Two sources briefed on the talks tell the outlet that there are two channels of communication, one through Pakistan, Egypt, and Turkey, and the other through direct text messages between Witkoff, Kushner, and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. The foreign ministers from the mediating countries are trying to get the sides to agree on a series of measures that will enable Trump to push off his deadline. They held phone calls yesterday with Kushner and Witkoff. Okay, but look what it says at the end. Asked whether he's concerned about harming civilians in Iran whom he wants to rise up, whom he wants to rise up and topple the regime, Trump says that they're living in fear. Quote, "They're afraid we're going to leave in the middle of the war, but we are not going to leave," he says. In other words, what Trump is saying is that we are going to see this through. I believe personally that from everything Trump was saying before the war, from everything he was saying about how no other president has dealt with this and how important it is to have a change. And for 47 years, the whole world's been terrorized by this regime and other presidents let it fester and I'm going to deal with it. I can't imagine that he's going to leave this thing with the regime intact, with any ability to continue to oppress its people. It doesn't make any sense. Okay. So I think that there's a little bit of looking at other regime change situations, or like Constantine was looking at the Soviet Union and assuming that there's a similarity here that there isn't necessarily. He also brought up this idea of we haven't seized the nuclear material. And people are talking about this. Look, the enriched uranium, wherever it is, the nuclear material is only important to get a hold of if the regime stays in power. That should be an obvious point. It should be an obvious point. Besides the fact that I'm not so concerned about it anyway, because look, the Israelis and the Americans are not giving up the air dominance. They're not giving up the gains that they've made, destroying all the manufacturing, the infrastructure to produce weapons. They're not giving that up so fast. So to me, it's not such an urgent issue. And as for a fear of an imposed foreign government, Elica said, well, we're not going to have an imposed government. And here's where I'm going to back off of Elica's position here. She was saying, well, we're not going to have a foreign government imposed. We're going to have Reza Pahlavi come in. He's going to be a transitional figure. We're going to have a free Western democracy. Not so fast. Not so fast. Remember, Trump is still eyeing this Venezuela model. That's why he's negotiating with Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister. If you really want to just destroy the regime, kill them all, wipe them out, bring down the regime. But Trump is still going after this Venezuela model where he's going to work with some people from the regime and, in the Venezuela style. I don't think it's going to work in the end. I don't think it's going to actually happen. But that's not going to be a foreign imposed government, because you're still going to have the air cover to the protesters. You're still going to have the Americans and the Israelis making sure that Iran is not a threat to its own people. How exactly this plays out, I don't know. But I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. We don't know what's actually happening on the ground there with the Iranian people, but we do know that they have, in massive, massive numbers, they have departed from the Islamic ideology that the regime puts forward. This is not like Nazi Germany or Imperial Japan, where the population, where the population was also indoctrinated and was with them. Germans loved Hitler. Japanese people loved the Hirohito regime. They had to be deprogrammed. I agree with Elica here. You're not going to have to deprogram the Iranian people when this is all said and done. Again, we don't know what it's going to look like, but we also don't know a whole lot about what's going on the ground. So that's that. I hope you found this interesting. Please drop me a comment. Let me know what you thought of this video. Let me know what you thought about what I said. Let me know what you think might happen there in terms of the fall of the regime. And we all have to continue to pray every day for the freedom of the Iranian people. God bless.